The air in the crematorium was thick with the scent of lilies and unspoken resentment. Liam stood beside the polished urn, a hollowed-out man in a borrowed suit. His world had shrunk to the smooth, cold ceramic that held the last physical remnants of his wife, Ilara. Grief was a physical weight, pressing down on his shoulders, stealing the air from his lungs. It was a cruel, silent thief. Across the room, he felt their eyes on him. Fiona, his mother-in-law, stood ramrod straight, her face a mask of aristocratic sorrow that did not quite reach her cold, calculating eyes. Beside her, her son Caleb shifted his weight, his expression a mixture of boredom and impatience. They were not mourning Ilara. They were presiding over a business transaction. The service ended. A meaningless blur of platitudes and forced sympathies followed. Liam shook hands and accepted condolences from people whose names he could not remember. He felt like a ghost at his own wife's farewell. Back at the grand, sterile house that Fiona called home, the performance continued. Guests spoke in hushed tones, sipping expensive wine and nibbling on delicate canapes. It was less a wake and more a networking event for the bereaved. Liam found a quiet corner, hoping to become invisible, to simply endure the remaining hours of this nightmare. But Fiona had other plans. She approached him, her heels clicking on the marble floor like tiny, sharp hammers. Caleb trailed behind her, a loyal shadow. "Liam," she said, her voice cutting through the low hum of the room. The conversations around them faltered. All eyes turned to him. "I know this must be difficult for you," she began, the sympathy in her voice as thin as spun glass. "Ilara was always so generous, worried about you, you know, how you would manage." Liam said nothing. He simply stared at her, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. Fiona opened her crocodile skin handbag and pulled out a check. She held it out, pinched between two perfectly manicured fingers. "This is to help you get on your feet," she announced, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "A little something to tide you over until you find your own way. We feel it's what she would have wanted." The check was for $5,000, a pittance, an insult wrapped in the guise of charity. He could feel the humiliation crawl up his neck, hot and prickly. It was a public dismissal, a final stamp of his worthlessness in their eyes. He was the charity case, the grieving husband being paid off and sent away. Caleb smirked. "Take it, Liam. You're going to need it. The real world is tough when you don't have an Ilara to lean on." Liam's hand trembled as he reached out and took the slip of paper. He didn't want to, but causing a scene felt like a betrayal of Ilara's memory. He folded it and put it in his pocket, the paper feeling like a brand against his skin. He turned to walk away, to escape the suffocating weight of their judgment. That was when he felt a gentle touch on his arm. It was Sarah, Ilara's younger sister. She was the only one in the family who had ever shown him genuine kindness. Her eyes, so much like Ilara's, were filled with a quiet fury. She pressed something small and hard into his palm. Her fingers squeezed his for a brief moment. "Don't listen to them," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Ilara loved you more than anything." She pulled her hand away. "She wanted you to have this. She told me to give it to you when the time was right. I think it is now." Liam looked down at his hand. Nestled in his palm was a small silver USB drive. It was cool to the touch, a tiny, solid object in a world that had become fluid and uncertain. He closed his fist around it, the sharp edges digging into his skin. It was a seed of mystery planted in the barren soil of his grief. For the first time all day, he felt something other than sorrow, a flicker of curiosity, a question. He nodded to Sarah, a silent thank you, and slipped the drive into his pocket next to the check that was meant to define his future. One was an insult, the other a promise. He just didn't know what it promised yet. The days that followed were a grey, formless fog. Liam moved through the house he had shared with Ilara, a home that now felt like a museum of a life that was no longer his. Every object held a memory. The chipped coffee mug she always used, the half-finished novel on her bedside table, the scent of her perfume lingering on a scarf draped over a chair. He remembered their beginning. He was a woodworker, finding solace in the grain and texture of oak and cherry. She was a brilliant engineer, a prodigy, shackled to her family's company, Vanguard Innovations. They met at a local art fair. He was selling hand-carved furniture. She was captivated by a rocking chair he had made, its lines smooth and elegant. "It's honest," she had said, running her hand along the polished wood. "It's not pretending to be anything it isn't." That was Ilara. She saw the truth in things and in people. Her family, however, saw only status and wealth. When Ilara brought Liam home to meet them, the disapproval was a palpable force in the room. Fiona had looked at his calloused hands with thinly veiled disgust. A craftsman? How quaint. Caleb had been more direct. "So, what's your 5-year plan, buddy? Or do you just plan to sell chairs on the side of the road forever?" They never understood what Ilara saw in him. They saw a simple man, a man of no ambition, a nobody. They couldn't comprehend that he was her anchor, her quiet harbour in the storm of her family's relentless pressure. He worked his steady job, paid the bills, and managed their home so she could pour her genius into Vanguard. It was her name on the patents, her mind that drove the company's success, but it was Fiona and Caleb who took the credit and enjoyed the lavish lifestyle. They treated him like a servant in his own life, a necessary but inconvenient accessory for Ilara. For 10 years he had endured their condescension for her sake. He had weathered the endless stream of insults, the backhanded compliments, the casual dismissals of his worth. He did it because he loved Ilara, and she was trapped in their world. Now she was gone, and he was left alone to face them. A week after the funeral, the USB drive felt heavy in his pocket. He had carried it with him everywhere, a tangible link to Ilara's last wishes. He sat at his desk, the house silent around him, and plugged the small silver device into his laptop. A single folder appeared on the screen. He clicked on it. It was password protected. His heart sank. Of course it was. He tried the obvious passwords first: her birthday, their anniversary, her pet's name. Vanguard 1. Nothing worked. Access denied flashed on the screen again and again, a digital wall between him and her final message. He leaned back, frustration and grief warring within him. What was on this drive? Why had she gone to such lengths to protect it? He closed his eyes, trying to think like her. Ilara was brilliant, but she was also sentimental. The password wouldn't be random. It would mean something. An old memory surfaced, unbidden. A trip they had taken years ago to a secluded cabin by a lake. They had been caught in a sudden thunderstorm, the power going out, leaving them in the dark with only a single candle. She had been scared of the thunder. He had held her and told her a silly, made-up story about a starlight keeper who gathered fallen stars. She had laughed, the fear momentarily forgotten. "Starlight Keeper," she had whispered later that night. "That's our secret, our magic word." His eyes snapped open. He typed the word, one word, no spaces, capitalizing the S and the K, just as he remembered her saying it. Starlight Keeper. He hit enter. The folder opened. It was filled with files, scanned documents, encrypted legal papers, video logs, and a private journal. One file stood out, its name simple and ominous: the Keystone. At that very moment, across town, Fiona and Caleb were sitting in the Vanguard boardroom, a bottle of champagne on ice between them. "The auditors are satisfied," Fiona said, a triumphant gleam in her eye. "With Ilara's shares reverting to the family trust, our controlling interest is absolute." Caleb topped off his glass. "And the loan for the expansion is all but approved. We're using the full patent portfolio as collateral. The bank sees it as ironclad." "As they should," Fiona sniffed. "It's our legacy. Ilara was brilliant, of course, but she lacked the killer instinct. She never saw the full potential." "She was too soft," Caleb agreed. "Speaking of which, have the lawyers served the notice to Liam yet?" "This morning," Fiona confirmed. "He has 30 days to vacate the house. It's a company asset, after all. We can't have him squatting there indefinitely." "Good. A clean break," Caleb said, raising his glass. "To the future of Vanguard, unsentimental, unstoppable." They clinked their glasses together, the sound sharp and final. They were utterly convinced of their victory, blind to the storm that was gathering on the horizon. They believed Liam was a nobody, a piece of debris to be swept away. They had no idea that the quiet, grieving woodworker was about to become the architect of their ruin. The doorbell rang, a sharp, intrusive sound that shattered the silence of Liam's morning. It was a courier with a long white envelope. Legal documents, an eviction notice. The words were cold and clinical. The property, registered as a Vanguard Innovations asset, was to be vacated within 30 days. A signature from Caleb as acting CEO was scrawled at the bottom. It was a final cruel twist of the knife. Not only had they taken his wife, now they were taking his home, the last sanctuary of their shared life. The grief that had paralyzed him for weeks began to burn away, replaced by a cold, hard anger. This was not just business. This was personal. This was a declaration of war. He turned back to the laptop, his resolve solidified. He opened the file named The Keystone. It wasn't a document. It was a short, encrypted text file. It contained only a name and a phone number. "Arthur Harrison, attorney at law," followed by a simple instruction. "Trust him. Tell him the Keystone is in play." Liam's hand shook as he dialed the number. He didn't know who Arthur Harrison was, but Ilara had trusted him. Right now, that was enough. A calm, professional voice answered on the second ring. "Harrison." "My name is Liam," he started, his own voice sounding foreign to him. My late wife was Ilara. She left me a message. She said to tell you, the Keystone is in play." There was a pause on the other end of the line. It stretched for a few seconds, thick with unspoken meaning. Then the voice returned, changed. It was warmer, laced with a solemn respect. "Mr. O'Connell, I've been waiting for your call. I am so very sorry for your loss. Ilara was a remarkable woman." "Can you tell me what this is all about?" Liam asked, the eviction notice lying on the table like a snake. "I can," Harrison said, "but not over the phone. Can you come to my office, say 11 o'clock tomorrow?" The law office of Arthur Harrison was not what Liam expected. It was a discreet, old-world establishment in a quiet part of the city, filled with dark wood, leather-bound books, and the hushed reverence of a library. Arthur Harrison himself was a man in his late 60s, with kind eyes and a mind that was clearly as sharp as a razor. He greeted Liam with a firm handshake and led him into a private conference room. "Ilara was more than a client," Harrison began, sitting opposite Liam. "She was one of the most brilliant and forward-thinking individuals I have ever had the pleasure of knowing. She was also acutely aware of her family's nature. He slid a thick binder across the table. She began preparing this 5 years ago. She saw this day coming. Liam opened the binder. It was filled with legal documents, corporate charters, and patent registrations. "I don't understand," Liam said, looking at the complex jargon. "What is all this?" Harrison leaned forward. "It's quite simple, really. Vanguard Innovations does not own its most valuable assets." Liam stared at him, confused. "The core patents," Harrison explained, his voice even. "The technology that drives 90% of their revenue. Ilara developed it, yes. But she never signed the ownership over to Vanguard." "Instead," he continued, tapping a specific document, "she filed the patents under a separate, privately held shell corporation she created, a company called Ethelgard Holdings." The name meant nothing to Liam. Harrison smiled faintly. "Ilara was clever. She structured a licensing agreement. Ethelgard Holdings licensed the technology to Vanguard for a nominal fee of $1 a year. It was a simple, renewable contract." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. That contract contained a very specific clause. In the event of her death, the license would automatically expire 30 days after the date of passing. It would not be automatically renewed. The pieces began to click into place in Liam's mind. The eviction notice, 30 days. "And who," Liam asked, his voice barely a whisper, "owns Ethelgard Holdings?" Arthur Harrison turned to the last page of the binder. It was a single sheet of paper, a certificate of succession. Upon her death, 100% of the shares and full directorial control of Ethelgard Holdings were transferred to a single, chosen successor. He pushed the document closer. Liam looked down and saw his own name. The air left the room. The world tilted on its axis. He wasn't a grieving widower being evicted from his home. He wasn't the penniless craftsman his in-laws thought he was. He was the sole owner of the entire technological foundation upon which Vanguard Innovations was built. He held the keystone to their whole empire. "My God," Liam breathed. "Indeed," Harrison said softly. "Fiona and Caleb are currently leveraging those patents they do not own, to secure a massive $100 million expansion loan. They are committing corporate fraud on a spectacular scale, and they have no idea." The full, devastating genius of Ilara's plan washed over him. It was a fortress she had built around her life's work, and she had just handed him the only key. She knew her family. She knew their greed would be their undoing. She had set a trap years ago, and they were now, at this very moment, gleefully walking right into it. Liam looked at the eviction notice he had brought with him, now lying on the polished table. It wasn't a threat anymore. It was a joke. He thought of the sneer on Caleb's face, the cold, dismissive look in Fiona's eyes, the humiliating check for $5,000. The grief in his heart did not vanish, but it made room for something else, something cold, precise, and powerful. It was the feeling of justice, waiting to be served. He looked up at Arthur Harrison, the scattered pieces of his life clicking into a new, sharp focus. The passive victim was gone. The sleeping giant was awake. "What do we do now?" Liam asked, his voice steady and clear. A slow, satisfied smile spread across Arthur Harrison's face. "Now, Mr. O'Connell," he said, "we let them build their gallows a little higher." The strategy session that followed was a masterclass in legal warfare. Harrison laid out the plan with the precision of a surgeon. It was elegant, brutal, and perfectly legal. "They believe they are untouchable," Harrison explained, pacing slowly in front of a large window overlooking the city. Their arrogance is our greatest weapon. We will not strike until the moment of their greatest triumph. The plan was a symphony in 3 movements. First, they would do nothing. They would allow the loan application to proceed. They would let Fiona and Caleb sign the papers, celebrate their victory, and announce their grand expansion to the world. They would let them tie the noose around their own necks. Second, on the very day the loan funds were to be transferred, Harrison would act. A formal cease and desist letter for catastrophic patent infringement would be delivered to the Vanguard boardroom. Copies would be sent simultaneously to the bank's legal department and the Securities and Exchange Commission. "It will be like pulling the pin on a grenade," Harrison said, a grim satisfaction in his tone. "The bank will immediately freeze the loan. The SEC will launch an investigation into their fraudulent collateral claims." The third movement was the masterstroke. Within the hour, Ethelgard Holdings, with Liam as its newly revealed director, would issue a formal press release. It would state that the exclusive license for the vCore technology suite had expired and that Ethelgard was now officially entertaining acquisition offers from all interested parties. "You will not just cripple them," Harrison concluded. "You will create a feeding frenzy. Their competitors will tear them apart. Their stock will be worthless by the end of the day." Liam listened, a cold calm settling over him. This wasn't just revenge. It was a precise, calculated demolition. It was the justice Elara had engineered from beyond the grave. He thought of her, working late at night, not just on her inventions, but on this intricate legal shield. She had been protecting her work and protecting him all along. "There's more," Harrison said, returning to the desk. He opened a different folder from the USB drive, one labeled Contingency. Elara was meticulous. She documented everything. Every instance of Caleb taking credit for her work. Every conversation where Fiona pressured her to sign over her intellectual property. There are emails, audio recordings, enough evidence to not only ruin them financially, but to potentially pursue criminal charges for corporate fraud and embezzlement. Liam felt a chill run down his spine. She had built them a cage as well as a gallows. He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the bustling city below. For weeks he had felt small and powerless. Now he felt like he was holding the entire city in the palm of his hand. He made his decision. The path was clear. He turned back to Harrison. The grief was still there, a dull ache in his soul, but now it was forged into a weapon. "We proceed," Liam said, his voice devoid of any hesitation. "We follow Elara's plan to the letter." Harrison nodded, a deep respect in his eyes. "Very well. I will prepare the documents." Liam spent the next 2 weeks playing the part of the defeated man. He began packing his belongings into boxes, the act a hollow pantomime of his eviction. He ignored the triumphant, condescending calls from Caleb. "Just checking in to see how the packing is going. Don't want you to be late. Fiona is already picking out new furniture." He let the calls go to voicemail, each message a fresh log on the pyre they were unknowingly building for themselves. He watched the financial news. Vanguard Innovations was the darling of the business world. Analysts praised the bold leadership of Fiona and Caleb, heralding a new era of growth for the company. An article featured a large, glossy photo of the two of them, smiling, raising champagne glasses. The caption read, "The Visionaries." Liam felt a bitter taste in his mouth. They were not visionaries. They were thieves, standing on the shoulders of a giant they had spent a decade trying to cut down. He observed their downfall from a distance, a ghost watching the hubris of the living. He rented a small, anonymous apartment across town, a command center for the coming storm. The day arrived, D-Day, the day the loan was to be finalized. Liam sat in his bare apartment with a laptop, a fresh pot of coffee, and a direct line to Harrison's office. He watched the stock market ticker for Vanguard, its price climbing in anticipation of the big news. In the opulent boardroom of Vanguard Innovations, the mood was electric. Fiona and Caleb were hosting the bankers, their faces flushed with success. The $100 million loan agreement sat in the center of the vast mahogany table. "A toast," Caleb announced, raising his glass, "to a new empire." As they drank, a prim, nervous-looking assistant entered the room and handed Fiona a sealed envelope. "This was just delivered by a priority courier, Madam Chairman." Fiona took it with an air of annoyance her celebration interrupted. She slit it open with a silver letter opener. Her smile froze. The color drained from her face. "What is it, Mother?" Caleb asked, still beaming. She passed him the letter without a word. He read it, his own confident expression crumbling into confusion, then disbelief. "Cease and desist," he sputtered, laughing nervously. "Patent infringement? This is absurd. It must be a mistake. Some ambulance-chasing lawyer trying to shake us down." One of the bankers cleared his throat, his own smile gone. "May I see that?" As the letter was passed around the table, a chill descended upon the room. The celebratory atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a tense, heavy silence. Caleb's phone rang. It was their corporate counsel, his voice frantic. "What the hell is Ethelgard Holdings? And why is the SEC calling me about fraudulent collateral claims?" Panic began to set in. Caleb, red-faced and sputtering, tried to reassure the bankers. "This is just a tactic from a competitor, a dirty trick. Our ownership of the VCore tech is absolute." His words rang hollow. The seed of doubt had been planted. Then the second phone rang. It was a reporter from a major financial news network. "Mr. Thorne, I'm calling for a comment on the press release from Ethelgard Holdings. Is it true that Vanguard Innovations no longer holds the license to its core technology? And can you confirm rumors that your biggest competitors are already in talks to acquire it?" The world tilted. Caleb dropped the phone, his face ashen. He looked at his mother. The mask of the powerful matriarch was cracking, revealing the raw panic beneath. In his small apartment, Liam watched the Vanguard stock symbol on his laptop. A red arrow appeared next to it. It began to fall, slowly at first, then faster. It was a stone dropped from a great height. A notification popped up on his screen. The press release was live. The first domino had fallen. Now came the cascade. The bankers, making polite but firm excuses, packed their briefcases and left the boardroom with alarming speed. The $100 million dream was dead. The stock ticker became a waterfall of red. Trading on Vanguard stock was halted as the price plummeted by 20, then 40, then 70% in a matter of minutes. Investors, large and small, began to panic. Margin calls were triggered. The phones in the Vanguard offices rang incessantly, a chorus of anger and fear. Fiona and Caleb were trapped in their glass-walled boardroom, watching their empire burn down around them on live television. The news channels were running with the story, analysts dissecting the catastrophic failure of due diligence. Their faces, once symbols of success, were now plastered across screens as emblems of fraud and incompetence. "Fix this!" Fiona shrieked at Caleb, her voice ragged. "You're the CEO! Do something!" "Do what?" he yelled back, his own composure shattered. "Call the owner of this Ethelgard ghost company. Threaten them. Beg them. We don't even know who they are." Liam's phone buzzed. It was Fiona. He looked at the caller ID, a grim sense of finality washing over him. He let it go to voicemail. A moment later, the message alert chimed. He pressed play and put the phone on speaker. Fiona's voice filled the small apartment, no longer the calm, condescending matriarch, but a wild, cornered animal. Liam, you worthless leech! If you have anything to do with this, I swear I will destroy you. I will ruin you. You will have nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing!" The message ended with a strangled sob of pure rage and despair. He listened to it, his expression unreadable. He felt no pleasure, no triumph, just a profound, weary sadness. This was the monster Ilara had fought against her whole life. He deleted the message. He looked out the window. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful end to a day of destruction. Ilara's plan had worked perfectly. Their world was in ruins, but it wasn't over. There was one final act left to play, the confrontation, the reckoning. 2 days later, Arthur Harrison received the call he had been expecting. It was from Fiona's lawyer, a man whose voice sounded exhausted and defeated. "My clients wish to arrange a meeting with the principal of Ethelgard Holdings," the lawyer said, all pretense of aggression gone. "They are prepared to be reasonable." "My client will agree to a meeting," Harrison replied calmly, "on 2 conditions. First, it will be Fiona and Caleb only. No lawyers. Second, the location will be of my client's choosing." The lawyer, desperate for any opening, agreed immediately. Harrison relayed the message to Liam. "They've taken the bait. Where would you like to meet them?" Liam knew the answer instantly. There was only one place this story could end. "Tell them to meet us at the house," he said. "Tomorrow, at noon." The irony was thick enough to taste. The very home they were evicting him from would become the stage for their final humiliation. The next day, Liam arrived at the house an hour early. He didn't unpack his boxes. Instead, he walked through the rooms, a silent farewell to the life he had built there. He stopped in the living room. On the mantelpiece was his favorite photo of Ilara. She was laughing, her head tilted back, her eyes sparkling with life. He picked it up and placed it in the center of the mantel, facing the door. He wanted her to be there, to bear witness. He sat down in the large armchair facing the entrance, the same chair he had often sat in while waiting for her to come home from work. He waited. At precisely noon, a car pulled into the driveway. The engine was cut and 2 doors slammed shut. The front door opened. Fiona and Caleb walked in. They looked haggard, aged 10 years in 2 days. Their expensive clothes were rumpled, their faces pale and drawn. They stopped dead in the entryway, their eyes falling on Liam. The expressions on their faces were a chaotic mixture of emotions, confusion, disbelief, a dawning, sickening horror. They had come expecting to negotiate with a ruthless corporate raider, a titan of industry. Instead, they found the quiet woodworker they had dismissed as dirt beneath their shoes. "You," Fiona whispered, the word choked with venom and disbelief. "It can't be." Liam didn't stand. He simply looked at them, his gaze steady and cold. The power dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted. He was no longer the victim, he was the judge. "Hello, Fiona. Caleb," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Please come in. Welcome to my house." Caleb found his voice first, a weak, sputtering rage. "What is this? What have you done? This is some kind of sick joke." "It's no joke," Liam replied, his voice never rising. "It's a lesson. One Ilara wanted to make sure you learned." He stood up slowly and walked towards the mantelpiece, his back to them. "You spent 10 years treating me like I was nothing," he began, his voice filling the silent room. "A parasite. A leech on your precious family. You thought I was weak, that I was dragging Ilara down." He turned to face them, his eyes boring into theirs. "But what you didn't know was that Ilara saw you for exactly what you were. Greedy, cruel, and short-sighted. She knew you would try to steal her life's work the moment she was gone, She knew you would cast me aside without a second thought. He gestured around the room. This house, the company, her legacy. You thought it all belonged to you by right. You were wrong. Vanguard Innovations is a hollow shell, he stated, each word a hammer blow. It's worthless without the V-Core patents, and those patents, they belong to Ethelgard Holdings. He let the silence hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final, devastating line. And as of 32 days ago, I am Ethelgard Holdings. The truth, undeniable and absolute, finally crashed down upon them. Fiona let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Her perfectly composed facade shattered into a million pieces. No, she whimpered, shaking her head. No, she wouldn't. She was my daughter. She was my wife. Liam's voice rose for the first time, sharp and cutting like a blade. And she trusted me, not you. She gave me the keystone to her kingdom because she knew I would protect it, while you would only exploit it. The breakdown was total. Fiona collapsed onto a nearby sofa, her body racked with shuddering sobs. The powerful matriarch was gone, replaced by a broken, weeping woman, stripped of all her power and prestige. All her threats, all her condescension, had amounted to nothing. Caleb just stood there, his face a mask of slack-jawed defeat. The arrogant, smirking enabler was gone, his entire world dismantled before his eyes by the one person he had never ever considered a threat. Liam walked over to the coffee table and placed a thin file on it. These are my terms. His voice was cold, clinical, the voice of a man executing a sentence that had been decided long ago. You will both resign from Vanguard, effective immediately. You will sign over your remaining shares to a trust Elara established for her sister, Sarah. You will issue a public apology, taking full responsibility for the fraudulent loan application and clearing Elara's name from any association with your incompetence. He paused. And you will disappear. I never want to see either of you again. Caleb looked at the file, then back at Liam, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. And if we refuse? Liam's expression didn't change. Then I will not only sell the patents to your biggest rival for pennies on the dollar, ensuring Vanguard is liquidated and its name erased from history, but I will also hand this over to the district attorney. He held up the small silver USB drive. Elara kept very detailed records, Caleb. Records of your embezzlement, your fraud, your theft of her work. I believe the authorities would be very interested in her journal. You won't just be bankrupt, you'll be in prison. The last bit of fight drained out of Caleb. He slumped, utterly and completely defeated. They had no cards left to play. Elara had thought of everything. Liam looked at the two of them, the architects of so much of his and Elara's pain, now just pathetic, broken figures. He felt no pity, he felt no joy. He only felt the quiet, profound finality of a chapter closing. He turned and walked towards the door, leaving them with the papers and the ruins of their lives. You have 24 hours, he said without looking back. He stepped out of the house and into the bright afternoon sun, closing the door behind him. He didn't look back. The past was finally where it belonged. The fallout was swift and merciless. As promised, Fiona and Caleb resigned in disgrace. Their public apology was a humiliating spectacle broadcast on every major news network. They signed away their shares, their wealth, their legacy. They vanished from the high society circles they had once dominated, forced into a quiet, modest existence that was, for them, a fate worse than any prison. They lost everything they valued because they had never valued the one thing that truly mattered, Elara. With Sarah now at the helm of the hollowed-out Vanguard, Liam worked with her to salvage what they could. They ensured the employees were taken care of, transitioning many of them to new roles in the venture that was to come. Liam, now the sole owner of a technology portfolio worth billions, made a choice. He could have become a titan of industry, a recluse, a playboy. He chose none of those things. Instead, he honored his wife. He established the Elara Foundation, a non-profit organization with a simple, powerful mission: to fund and mentor brilliant, ethical inventors who were being overlooked by a world obsessed with profit over progress. He used his immense wealth not to build an empire for himself, but to cultivate a garden of innovation in her name. He didn't live in a mansion or drive a fleet of exotic cars. He bought a modest house with a large workshop out back, surrounded by trees. He went back to his first love, woodworking. The scent of sawdust and the feel of polished oak were more real to him than any stock certificate. His life found a new rhythm. Mornings were spent managing the foundation with Sarah, reviewing proposals from bright young minds. Afternoons were spent in his workshop, his hands covered in dust, creating things of simple, honest beauty. One afternoon, a young woman named Chloe, one of the first inventors to be funded by the foundation, stopped by his workshop. She was brilliant and kind, with a passion for her work that reminded him so much of Elara. She brought him a cup of coffee. "I just wanted to thank you, Liam," she said, her eyes shining with gratitude. "You didn't just give me funding, you gave me a chance. You believed in me." Liam smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. That's what the foundation is for. They talked for hours about her project, about his woodwork, about life. There was no pretense, no agenda, just a simple human connection. It was a hint of a new beginning, a quiet promise of a future that was not defined by grief, but by hope. Later that evening, he stood in his finished workshop, a new rocking chair, smooth and elegant, standing in the center. He ran his hand along its polished surface. He had come full circle. He was still a craftsman, but he now understood what Elara had seen in his work all those years ago: honesty, integrity. True power, he realized, was not in a boardroom or a bank account. It was in the quiet strength to endure, the loyalty to a memory, and the courage to build something good and lasting from the ashes of pain. True wealth wasn't measured in the billions he now controlled, but in the legacy of kindness and innovation he was building in Elara's name, and in the peace he had finally found within himself. She had given him the keystone, and he had used it not to lock a door, but to build a new one, opening it for others to walk through. And in that he had found his ultimate victory,